So one of the learning curves I've been on as legislative counsel at the Institute for Justice is trying to navigate all of the different state lobbyist registration and compliance requirements. So a lot of my job, obviously, is the lawyerly part of my job is drafting model legislation, turning policy into legislative language that can be used generically, and then adapting that for use in different states or at the federal level. But then another part of my job, equally important, is actually trying to persuade different states legislators and executive officers to adopt that legislation, to sponsor it, to try and shepherd it through the legislative process, and then ultimately sign it into law. And doing that is the definition of lobbying, I suppose. So most people, when they think of lobbyists, they think of, perhaps very well-suited corporate people representing corporate interests, and it has kind of negative connotations. But lobbying actually can be anyone that's trying to influence the course of legislation in a state, and that could be a charity trying to do that. It could just be a private individual. So it's not just big business doing this. It's a lot of small organizations, individuals, and non-profits like the Institute for Justice. So and the tricky thing is that in different states, different things count as lobbying. So in one state, just simply going to testify at a committee hearing, if you're from out of state, if a bill has a committee hearing, that could count as lobbying. In other states, that could be fine. You might not need to register as a lobbyist if you're just going to testify on a bill. But if you also plan to then take meetings or try to meet with maybe the bill sponsor or different legislators, then that can trigger lobbying requirements. Fortunately, I don't have to keep all of this in my own head. We have a legal counsel department that know exactly when and where we need to lobby. So I can check with them before I intervene on any particular bill or before I start working, trying to get our model legislation filed in a different state to figure out exactly what I need to do. I'm in Springfield, Illinois for the first time, so I had to check with our council, are there any lobbying requirements for Illinois? And it turns out there are. I do need to register as a lobbyist for the state of Illinois in order to do my work tomorrow. Going to testify in committee hearing in support of those two zoning bills, and then having meetings, hopefully with various state legislators as well. So I submitted all of the information, or rather our very helpful counsel's office submitted that information for me. And I'm now in the system as a registered lobbyist for the state of Illinois. In Illinois, that comes with certain requirements. So in nearly all states, there are disclosure requirements. If you're expending money in any way, as part of your work, your lobbying or advocacy work, often you have to report that. Sometimes you only have to report that if you're spending more than a certain amount of money. At IJ, that generally doesn't come up for me because we persuade people. As a 501c3 non-profit organization, we're not involved in endorsing political candidates, funding campaigns, doing anything like that. All we do is we try to persuade people through the power of our ideas. We try and persuade state legislators that we have the best policy, that passing it is going to be good for their constituents, for the state, and then, for them as well, ultimately, as the sponsors of our good legislation. So while we don't get involved in the political nitty-gritty, there are still certain requirements that have to be met. One of them is the expenditure reports. But in Illinois, where I've just registered, it turns out there's also additional requirements. And a couple of those are ethics training that you have to complete every year in order to remain in compliance, and harassment and discrimination prevention training as well. So I'm newly in the system, so I've only just been set up, but I'm immediately flagged, and this is standard, as not in compliance. So I see two not in compliance things right there. So before I do anything else, I have to now sit here, do a couple of computer-based training classes, probably complete a quiz at the end of that, just to check those boxes, show that I understand the ethics requirements of lobbying in the state of Illinois, and then the harassment and discrimination training as well. Then hopefully those not in compliance will turn to green checks. Then I can go pick up my lobbyist card, which will let me bypass security at the state capitol, get in a bit quicker when I have meetings and so on, and then I'll be good to go. So there's been another learning curve. So I now know what it takes to become a registered lobbyist in the state of Illinois. A little more tricky than in some other states. There are a lot of states where I've done quite extensive work where I haven't had to declare or register in any way. But different states approach this differently, and they're all trying to, safeguard the integrity of their legislative and democratic processes. And this is the way that the state of Illinois has chosen to do that. So it's important that I remain in compliance with that. So having got to Springfield, Illinois, checked into my hotel, before I do anything else, I'm going to finish this training, get squared away, get registered as a lobbyist. I'll see you on the other side.